In 2013, I played some Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. I thought the game was good, but I ended up dropping it about halfway through. Truth be told, I didn't really get it at the time. I didn't get that it was a collection of mechanics Capcom had been iterating on for more than a decade. I didn't get that it was a love letter to both Japanese and Western depictions of medieval fantasy. And I didn't get that it wasn't really finished. At the time, I was a scrub. My knowledge of Capcom didn't extend past Mega Man and Street Fighter. My medieval RPG tastes were all Bethesda flavored. I still thought the Elder Scrolls, particularly Oblivion, was the greatest thing since busting a nut. Steve Irwin was the only Monster Hunter I knew, and Berserk was something I went on the mic after a dipshit feeds mid lane for the first 5 minutes. Since then, I've read more books, fed more lanes, played more games, and experienced peak manga. All this fat knowledge helped me foster a greater appreciation for what Dragon's Dogma was trying to do, but it didn't help me fall in love with the game we actually received. The highs had me wondering why I never gave it a chance all those years ago, and the lows bored me more than thinly veiled Oscar bait. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Brad. Why'd you do that to your nose, Bradley? Mr. Cooper, why is your film about a music man so devoid of music? I seriously haven't seen a story this sloppy and uninteresting since, well, shit. Spoilers for a decade-old game, by the way. The storytelling of Dragon's Dogma is not great, but unlike Bradley's Jack session masquerading as a poignant film about a complex man, the lack of plot cohesion doesn't damn Dragon's Dogma. Great games don't necessarily need great stories. Hell, some of the best games ever made have less plot than an episode of Bluey on mute. Storytelling is hard on its own, but telling a well-paced and written story in a non-linear environment like an open world game is almost impossible. Gamers are curious creatures. They naturally get distracted by throwing civilians off of cliffs or kicking a cyclops in the dick. By the time they roll back around to the main quest, they have enough power to kill Yahweh himself. But since they're at this point on the quest line, they'll have to settle for learning how to harvest turnips from Mrs. Dickinson instead. Most of Dragon's Dogma's storytelling sins are of omission rather than commission. The story is like a rich, drugged out absentee father. You wish that they were around more, and about the time you forget all about them, they show back up with some badass new toys and take you someplace fucking wild, before ultimately running themselves through with a sword and crowning you as the new Holy Spirit. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This game opens with a large dragon that destroys a village and takes your heart away, so you want revenge on the dragon and your heart back. That's kinda it. There's more story, but it's like a whirlwind of nonsense. The story jumps from plot point to plot point with huge lulls of no plot in between, and it's almost incomprehensible because of this. It was kind of like watching Dune 2 before watching Dune 1 if you were also on a recreational amount of cough medicine. You can kind of piece together what's going on, but you're not sure if you missed something or if the dextromorphan has finally given you Alzheimer's. A lot of this is because the gameplay and story feel so segmented from each other. Better not blink during a cutscene because that's the only place the story actually unfolds. It's not like The Witcher 3 where the story and gameplay mix together seamlessly. Story is for cutscenes and maybe a conversation or two, but otherwise gameplay is devoid of any story bits. The storytelling failures are unfortunate because the world and lore of Dragon's Dogma is interesting, but you just won't be immersed in it by playing the game normally. You'll need to seek it out on your own. Even then, most of the main plot is generic fantasy fare. You and your crew are collecting items to try and slay a dragon. It's literally a tale as old as time. There's hints to crazier things, but with how scatterbrained the storytelling is, it's hard to make sense of those moments. By the time these elements come together to create some of the most batshit insane plot points, the game is pretty much over. It's not a slow ramp to insanity. The game just becomes completely insane and then screeches to a halt without any warning. Fight this dragon, good job, it's dead. Oh, by the way, you're literally fucking God, and credits. Looking into the development shines a big light on why it's like this. They were trying to create a love letter to Western RPGs, Italian countrysides, real medieval fantasy, and of course the Lord of the Rings and Berserk. Those things are a big driving factor behind the old Englishy way the characters talk, the geography of the map, and the more grounded gothic art style the game uses. They wanted to emulate the grand scale of games like Oblivion, Fallout, and Fable, and that grandeur was a problem for development that just couldn't be solved. Dragon's Dogma was a gamble for Capcom that they sank a lot of faith, money, and resources into, to. The vision for the project was not reasonable to achieve. The style of game and development was outside of anyone at Capcom's normal wheelhouse. This inexperience naturally led to struggles with productivity. Now, if Capcom were a Southern California studio, the executives would have forced the developers to crunch until the death toll hit double digits, all while sipping on stolen breast milk until canceling the project altogether. But since Capcom isn't a freedom-loving American company, they chose to scale back significantly to try and release something in a reasonable timetable. This scaling back left a very noticeable impact on many aspects of the game, but I think the story is the most noticeable loss. Even if you don't know about the development, the story feels like it's jumping all over the damn place. It feels like it's building up to something before it just sort of ends. That's because it was supposed to be much longer and way crazier. At one point, you were supposed to go to the fucking moon before becoming God and ruling over the entire world. This is why the base game has you do your best Jacob impression by wrestling God at the end of the game. But there was supposed to be more before and after this to make it more natural within the story. At the end of the day, Capcom was forced to make more cuts than a publisher after a year of record profits. It's why a lot of the game feels unfinished and the story feels so disjointed. Everyone just had to put pieces together as they were, and the result is a strange story, good gameplay, and odd design choices all over the place. These development woes are part of its cult classic appeal as well. People have been brainstorming about what could have been more than a teen girl after her first breakup. It's not too different from fans of Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, or Kurt Cobain endlessly debating on what their future music could have sounded like. But I'm here to look at the game we actually got, and as far as story is concerned, I was left supremely disappointed. The context behind that disappointment provides more insight, but that doesn't change the story. I'd give it a 2 out of 5 if I was put in a jigsaw-like contraption and forced to score the story on its own. It's probably the weakest part of the game overall, but luckily it's the least important part of the game as well. But if you're here for the gameplay, I don't know, maybe you'll like it? I don't really know what you're into. You've just been staring at the screen silently for the past few minutes, and it's freaking me out.
You are freaking me out.
At its core, Dragon's Dogma is an open-world RPG. You run around doing random quests to get gear or gold, level up by questing and killing, and unlock new skills through those levels. And if that sounds like every RPG you've ever played, that's because it kinda is. The reason that Dragon's Dogma stands out is because unlike most games in that vein, the combat is the primary focus, and the combat isn't total dog shit. Nowadays, it's a little bit different, but back in my day, big open-world RPGs had real-time combat held together by papier-mâché made from golden showers. Series like The Elder Scrolls showed up to their 5th entry with the same combat complexity as Minecraft. The melee combat consists of DPS racing with the occasional pause to use items, essentially the same system they'd used since Arena. That's why everyone played Stealth Archer instead. It was more fun than smashing the left-click button, harder than you do over the like and subscribe button when Mr. Beast commands you to. The Elder Scrolls' success is almost in spite of its combat rather than as a result of it. All the other systems and stories and worlds is what kept people coming back, not the unga-bunga combat. Unless you're playing a mage in Morrowind, the local schizophrenics tell me it's quite fun. In a lot of open world RPGs like The Elder Scrolls, the combat can feel like an afterthought or just an obstacle to slow down your main progression. But in Dragon's Dogma, I welcomed a majority of the encounters I had. Hell, I'd nuke a bunny just for fucking breathing. There's 3 pieces to the combat that make it so unique and fun from start to almost the finish, and that's the vocations, pawns, and the foes themselves. The vocation variety and the ability to change them without much of a hassle is a huge selling point. Going back to Skyrim, I think the class variety is fine. There's a lot of flexibility to build your character how you want to build them, but I hope you don't change your mind down the line. Retooling a mid to late game Skyrim character is like changing careers at 55. It's strictly speaking possible to go from a hired gun to a preschool teacher, but what if those old urges come back? If you're a level 80 mage in vanilla vanilla Skyrim, switching to a new build is probably more work than just starting over. The way level scaling in the game works, it heavily incentivizes sticking to one consistent playstyle. Whereas Dragon's Dogma, all you do is gotta talk to this one guy and boy howdy, you just went from sword and board to Magic Man without losing all your combat potential. This works because these builds are distinct classes and they're called Vocations. And Vocations have their own level separate from your player level. This also works because Dragon's Dogma doesn't scale the world to any of these levels, just like the good Lord intended. When your character levels up, that gives you your standard stat upgrades like any other RPG, and this level always goes up regardless of what vocation you're playing, whereas your vocation rank only goes up for the vocation you're using. As it progresses, it gives you more abilities to use in combat. It also grants passive perks called augments that you can use on any of your vocations. As an example of how this works, the fighter vocation has an augment called Sinew that allows you to carry more weight. Once you've unlocked it, you can use it on any of the vocations you want, but an active combat ability like Dire Onslaught can't be used with a mage class. However, if another class has access to sword and shield as a weapon, you could use that skill on them. This system encourages experimenting with different vocations and weapon types, as it always feeds back into more combat strength regardless of what vocation you're playing. And since it's so easy to switch between them, that experimentation is really too fun to pass up. If you're ever bored by the combat of Dragon's Dogma, you're no more than 4 clicks away from completely changing how it plays. Barring the late game, if you are still bored after changing vocations, I don't know, man, I think you gotta get off TikTok. I'm pretty sure your brain's fucking fried. This whole time I've seen you staring, and yes, that is my wife. The beautiful, beautiful Uwu-chan. Or as the streets know her, M. Bison. She was created by Danklin, or as the streets know him, Denis. And for all you Frenchies rushing to put "it's Denis" in the comments,
Je refuse d'utiliser tes drôles de mots Frenchy.
Uwu-chan is what they call a pawn. And of all the weird aspects in Dragon's Dogma, these little guys might be my favorite. Around the front of the game, you're asked to make a pawn. It's a companion character that'll follow you throughout the entire game. They're almost the same as a player character. They can be equipped with weapons and armor, they have their own levels and vocation ranks, they can utilize almost any vocation, and if built properly, they are killing machines. You could run through the world with just you and your main bitch, but technically a full party consists of 3 pawns. 1 that you make and 2 that you choose. You can run into pawns wandering around the world, or you can search for more specific types of pawns by using this stone that teleports you to the 1 stage from Tekken. The other 2 pawns is where the system shines. Just like your pawn, these pawns are made by other people. However, you can't change anything about them. You're renting them as they are with their level, class, and gear forever stuck in time. If you're playing like a Giga Chad and changing your vocation and gear every couple of levels, every few hours you'll have a completely unique party that plays very differently than the one you had just a few hours ago. Pawns will also learn on their adventures. If a pawn has been through a quest before, they'll speak up about it. If they know the fastest way to fist fuck a monster to death, they'll tell you. Or if they're familiar with a cave, they'll point out a hidden wall they saw another player break through. It's a really cool way to have other players influence your own playthrough, and I loved mixing and matching different pawns from start to end. The only real downside of this system is the lack of customization. Many pawns will be wearing the same gear, sound the same, and look very similar to other pawns. There's only human looking pawns, so there's only so much difference on display. As far as gear goes, there's best in slot gear for certain classes without any option to transmog that stuff to look different, so you'll see the same outfits a lot. Otherwise, these guys are what makes Dragon's Dogma Dragon's Dogma. They're a great addition and they make the game feel more connected and alive. Combat is only as fun as the foes you're fighting. Fist fighting another dude is fun, but professionals know the real fun fights are locked behind the glass at your local Petco. The most memorable action games are those that present unique challenges to the player. Series like Dark Souls and Monster Hunter have built their entire brands around large fights with interesting foes. This is something Dragon's Dogma does well too. The big baddies in this game are huge. They're large enough that you can climb on them and walk underneath them. They're nowhere near Shadow of the Colossus size, but you can see the inspiration. These guys require all your attention and actual strategy. A monster like the Chimera has 3 distinct heads which do their own damage. The lion head and body pounce at you for physical attacks. The goat head on the spine casts magical spells, while the snake on its tail attacks those trying to get to the goat from the rear. Getting cock-blocked by a snake on your way to the goat is terrible. Wait. Is that why Kanye said those awful things? There's a handful of big-ass monsters in the game, and fighting them was always a treat. You can find them in the wild or in certain boss encounters, and figuring out the best way to take them down and actually doing it in the heat of battle was a lot of fun. I just wish that there was more of them. As much as I love the base combat, the class, and the party system of Dragon's Dogma, the actual encounters can get extremely repetitive. The big guys are the exception, but most of your playtime isn't fighting the big guys. A majority your time is fighting goblins and people, with a huge chunk devoted to fighting dogs like you're training to get drafted by Michael Vick. There's simply not enough enemy variety in Dragon's Dogma to sustain the amount of time that you spend in its world, and the smaller enemies don't have the same interesting mechanics that their larger brothers have. Sure, the easiest way to kill a Saurian is to chop its tail off before stabbing him in the face for massive damage, but once you know that, you just do it every time. It becomes second nature whenever you fight them, and you'll do it hundreds of times before the game's over. I really only remember 5 basic enemies from my whole playtime: humans, goblins, saurian harpies, and the Paw Patrol. The only reason it's not mind-numbingly boring is because you can switch up so much about the way that you want to play the game. But by the end of the game, you've played it in pretty much any way that you can, and encountering goblins when running from place to place is no longer sparking any joy. The game could have used a few more normal enemies and a few more big guys, because what's here is awesome, but just like the story, it just isn't quite enough to leave me fully satisfied. Dragon's Dogma isn't just combat and crazy cutscenes, and the things outside of that are easily the weakest and weirdest parts of the game. All the quests are MMO-style quests. Kill 35 undead warriors, gather 14 stones, take an item from this guy to that guy. They're not memorable at all, and most of them have about the same plot as MMO quests too. That is to say, a single blurb of text and nothing else. A majority of these quests are taken from a quest board and serve as nothing more than a way to get XP, gold, and items. You certainly won't be playing them for interesting mechanics or in-depth stories. Dragon's Dogma also really likes escort missions. There's a few times you'll be tasked with taking a character from one side of the map to the other. Unlike your pawns, the escortee is typically dumber than a Dr. Dankbot video. These guys will run off and get killed in combat if you're not careful, and that's game over for that quest. Unless you're lucky enough to have a way to revive them, which you probably won't. I actually appreciate the boldness of letting you fail quests like this. Some RPGs are such pussies that the only way to fail quests is pretty much on purpose. I've been so coddled by that design I half expected the NPC to respawn out of nowhere, but nah, they dead. These quests can be absolutely cheesed though. If you have the means to do it, you can just fast travel from one side of the map to the other. The NPC will travel with you and the quest is over in like 3 seconds. Speaking of fast travel, this game has an interesting fast travel system. You have a handful of port crystals that act like fast travel beacons you can put anywhere in the world. To use these beacons, you need a fairy stone and you can just buy as many of these as you want. Early on in the game, I never really used any fast travel, but by the end of my time with it, I was using it a lot, which is probably sacrilege to the creator and the fans of Dragon's Dogma. In an interview about Dragon's Dogma 2, the director of both the first and second games said, "Travel is boring? That's not true. It's only an issue because your game is boring. All you have to do is make travel fun." To which I say, you're not talking about this one, right? The traversal in Dragon's Dogma is as bog standard as you could possibly get. You hold forward, sprint until you're out of stamina, walk until it's refreshed, and then do it all over again. There's no interesting movement mechanics, which makes traveling great distances in this game feel like an absolute chore. This is only made worse by the sparse environments and repeated visits to the same places. The world map isn't massive, but it is relatively empty, so the game needs to reuse what interesting points of interest that it has, and a few repeated landmarks are only accessible through certain choke points. If you're at the Mountain Way Castle and you need to go to the rest area, you can either go this way, which will be up a hill with a falling boulder and human bandits at the top, or this way through the quarry, which will be monster-free after completing a quest to do so. Either way, without fast travel, you'll see these two routes a lot, as they're the only way to get to this section of the map. The first couple times through these places is cool, unexpected, and dangerous, but after the 10th time killing bandits at the top of the hill, I was dozing off like Lil Weezy in the studio after his third lean bottle. If I had to play Dragon's Dogma with the original fast travel system from before Dark Arisen, I'm pretty sure you'd see my face on the news again in conjunction with yet another national tragedy. Luckily, we have more port crystals and eternal fairy stones, but the original system gave you only one port crystal, which meant your ass was going to be running everywhere. The map can be beautiful, but you'll see the same areas over and over again. It's also maybe too realistic, with a majority of it feeling like a brisk hike through Italy or something, complete with authentic Italians. Some of these issues could have been resolved with a greater amount of interesting things to see in the world, and maybe your weird uncle's favorite thing in the world: some ponies. A game like Skyrim felt like a new cave system could be around every corner, and each section of the map felt interconnected but varied, which almost made up for its extremely boring traversal. Fast forward to the current day and we have a whole ass nuts and bolts sequel disguised as a Zelda game. Open world design and traversal has come a long way, and it's one of the weakest parts of Dragon's Dogma. Outside of the combat and quests, nothing in Dragon's Dogma is straightforward, which is cool because there's a million little secrets in this game, and skimming through the wiki shows that there's great depth of things to discover. Even questing uses a convoluted time system for what quests can be completed when in the main quest line, with certain points in the main quest wiping the ability to do certain side quests. It's kinda cool, really confusing, but makes the game feel more alive. I never mentioned crafting. It's here. It's almost a copy-paste of Resident Evil and its herbs. There's a metric ton of things you can make, but I never found myself using items that often. I grabbed everything I could in hopes of upgrading my equipment with a different system, but I found my healers did enough work normally that I didn't really need to engage with the actual items. You know how I said Dragon's Dogma's quests are MMO-like? Well, Dragon's Dogma is an MMO-like in another way. All the best content is the endgame. There's two main endgame activities. The Everfall. I cannot believe these cucks ripped off Tears of the Kingdom, and Bitterback Isle. The Everfall is technically before the end of the game and has less to do than the Isle, but fuck you, it's my video. Both are insanely fun combat trials meant for strong late game characters, and they are the best part of the game. Both are exploring dungeons and engaging in combat with big and small foes, which is the best part of the base game. I've spent more time here than I should, and I keep playing it. I don't love Dragon's Dogma as a whole, but this shit can go straight into my veins. In many ways, Dragon's Dogma is a collection of everything Capcom had built up until that point. The inventory crafting of Resident Evil, the timed button combo system from Devil May Cry, the massive bosses of Monster Hunter, and a return to RPGs like Breath of Fire. There's a little bit of everything in Dragon's Dogma, but it still feels like a unique vision. Dragon's Dogma forges its own identity by using bits and pieces of other projects, not too different from a hip-hop producer sampling old beats to make something new. Dragon's Dogma is kind of like chili. There's lots of ingredients slammed together, and sometimes you have a scoop and it tastes like heaven, whereas other times you have a scoop and it's just beans. Would I recommend Dragon's Dogma in current year? Really only to those willing to put up with some strange design choices in return for great combat. The game isn't bad, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a must play unless you're a fan of the genre. If you're looking for a gripping narrative like The Witcher 3 or compelling exploration like the newer Zelda games, you'll be let down by Dragon's Dogma. But if you want to fuck up some goblins with some sick ass magic, you're in for the time of your life. Truth be told, I only played it because I wanted to get ready for the sequel. I should probably check in on how that's doing. Oh no, contact the Seneschal. Capcom has sinned again.
That's right, we're Japanese.